أفضل الممارسات في مجال الاستكشاف والاستخراج في المتوسط، الفرص والتحديات، هو عنوان كلمة الدكتور إلي ظاهر المدير الفني للاستشارات في شركة شلومبرجي الشرق الأوسط وآسيا. دكتور ظاهر تفضل.
So, thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, good morning. I guess I will be following along the lines with Mr. Fabrizio, since he presented a bit the landscape of the oil and gas, and he put in some recommendations of what Lebanon has to do in order to progress in the oil and gas exploration and production. But I'll show you a little bit some of the interesting information to put a bit more perspective on the challenge ahead. And then I'll point the picture on the rewards that Lebanon might reap and gain from that experience. So I'll start with a similar slide that Mr. Fabrizio had, but here I have the history between 1970 to 2010 with the capacity and demand curve tightly together. And most importantly is the yellow and red lines, which projects the exploration production expenditure that countries and companies are spending in order to find and produce, exploit the oil and gas. I want to point at 2005 to 2010, and if you see the scale of growth, it's about 5 times the investment, close to 5 times the investment in oil and gas. And yet, if you look at the capacity growth, it's hardly probably about 30%. Means the industry went through 5 years of exponential investing in oil and gas, yet to grow the capacity by so much. So now we are in financial crisis. So what's going to happen that the industry has basically dropped the investment. So if the investment amounts have gone down, what's going to happen with the capacity when the demand will grow in the near future? Okay, so I'll let you take your conclusion on that, but we're going to see a few years ahead with a lot of challenges. The next one I want to show is the oil reserves to production. Now, you probably heard about or read about a lot of theories about peak oil, or the oil is going to finish and we're going to run out of hydrocarbon. 40 years ago, they said we still have 40 years of reserves to exploit. 40 years later, which is now, they still say the average reserves is about 40 years. So this will actually show you around the world, if you average everything, you'll have about 40 years of reserves, assuming the current production rate today and assuming there is no more discoveries in the future. And this part is basically Middle East takes about 75 plus years of reserves. Russia is basically the next one, Europe and Russia, and then the rest of the world is basically below 30. What's happening here in the reserves, as we explore more and more, we will find more reserves. As the technology evolves, we will improve the recovery factor. Therefore, we have more production, and so forth. So the cycle continues. And now in the last 10 years, we had so much in technological advances that the actual recovery factor has changed from at 20% to some places at 50% or 60% recovery. Now let's talk about worldwide discoveries. Again, a snapshot from 1960 to basically today. And what you have here is the discovery numbers and the average size. And as you see from the early days, we had large discoveries and a lot of discoveries. But as we move on to today, the discoveries became smaller, less discoveries, and more challenging discoveries. So companies and countries have to rely on really advanced technology and advanced intelligence to really try to find that oil or gas that is hidden and use basically maximize their investment where they're going to invest basically on which discovery and which field that would give them better return. So now we take the human aspect, the human resources aspect in this industry. So today we are an aging population in oil and gas. So you have most of the people working in the oil and gas business are actually in the mid-40s to late 40s. And we see here there is a shortage of young engineers and geoscientists entering the industry. Maybe because the industry is not very attractive to them. Maybe they went into finance or IT, whatever attraction they had at the decision-making process when they went to university. But we see definitely the oil and gas was not an attractive business to go and join the industry. Now, if we project the future, let's look at today. Now, with the effort that was recognized by the oil and gas companies, we made a lot of efforts in universities to actually attract them to the oil and gas business. So that's why you see the young entrants at a high number. However, the aging population is now going to retire within 5 years. So in 5 years, you're going to have young graduates with probably 5 years of experience and a lot of experts exiting the industry and retiring or living on the beach or whatever. And project 2020, 10 years from now, which probably if you start today in Lebanon, as Mr. Fabrizio said, you're going to probably start, if you find a discovery, you're going to start the first production in 10 years. So you'll find that you have a very young population in the world that's going to manage the oil and gas business. So it's a challenge by itself. Now, coupled with it, the financial crisis. So if we look at the financial crisis, and here I have petrotechnical professionals, and we call it the crew change. So this is a study done by a group within Schlumberger called Business Consulting, and they did the survey in a lot of oil and gas companies to come up with the actual number of experts required to manage oil and gas business. And the challenge is in 2014, because there was not much of recruiting, because of that crew change effect that I explained to you a bit earlier, we will be 30,000 people short in that industry in 4 years. So we will be short of people. So what happened is oil and gas companies will have a challenge. They will ask people to do more with less. They will have to be pushy on becoming more productive. They will use a lot of technology to actually collaborate, virtual communication, knowledge management, all these buzzwords. But the whole industry needs to rethink the way human resources are used and exploited in terms of adding value and finding oil and gas and producing them. So what does this mean? If I would put it into perspective, so these are the 3 slides that I covered. So we're definitely going to see a demand growth in the future. Finding hydrocarbon is smaller and yet more challenging. And then we're going to face a shortage of petrotechnical people and expertise in the field. Now in Lebanon, you add to it, yet we understood from the Norwegian minister, that ambassador, that we're working on a petroleum law. I hope the petroleum law would cover a lot of things, because there is the law, the petroleum law, but also there is the production sharing agreement, whichever form, that actually details the taxation, the royalty, the engagement, the commitment from both sides. Should an oil and gas company come in and engage in the exploration production activity. So hopefully this would cover everything. Now coupled to it, if we think that the Mediterranean or the offshore of Lebanon is a place where it could be promising, you have complex structure, you have deep water challenge, you have probably high temperature areas, you don't have 3D data, 3D seismic data, we call it, and we never had drilled any well in that. So we are basically relying on some seismic surveys and the regional understanding of the basin of the Mediterranean. Coupled with it, we don't have actually an oil and gas study, a degree in Lebanon. The only place where you find some geology bachelor degree is in the AUB. So we don't have E&P resources developed locally. So what does it mean for Lebanon? So the first translation of this is that we will face, as Lebanese, and I'm Lebanese, we will face a stronger competition from operators. So an oil and gas company will look and will scout. They have a group that basically does scouting of all the different prospects that possibly being evaluated so they can take ownership of that block and operate it. So they will look at all the opportunities and when they will rank them. And if the actual exploration or the offshore and onshore, should we decide to do one or both, is not very attractive and promising in terms of return on investment, and it's too risky, then the oil and gas companies will shy away, and the premiums that actually they're ready to pay to acquire the rights to access that block will be too low. So we have a stronger competition on that. We have a challenge to provide cost-effective facilities, so tax breaks, anything that we can do within the law to facilitate, lower the barrier of entry for that industry to come and operate. And of course, we talked about the legal and fiscal framework to be very attractive, because one of the evaluation of for an oil and gas company that would come in and look at prospectivity in Lebanon is they would have to look at the terms, because it's a long-term engagement. When they sign a production sharing agreement, this is a 25-year agreement. So they have to look at all the aspects, from the exploration commitment, the return on investment on that, to the production and the production sharing. And of course, the organizational structure, I hope within the ministry we will have a hydrocarbon structure with a strategy and a mission and objectives of what is that hydrocarbon department will have to do. Is it to validate the work? Is it to organize it? Is it to actually do the work themselves, or just to liaise with the oil and gas companies that are operating? So there is definitely a definition of the mission of that hydrocarbon entity that would have to be formed with a proper structure in it. And the last one I forgot to mention, which again I mentioned, a race to develop local E&P skilled people trained to match the timeline. So if Lebanon would to embark on that road, they'll have a timeline, and we have to prepare and start marketing to our high schoolers, for example, to go into that industry if they wish so, to basically make them aware of the attractability of that industry and the rewards and the challenges of that. And maybe it's a choice for them to join the industry, so we can prepare the local talents and we'll become cost efficient, and yet we will preserve those skills in Lebanon. So I would finalize with I will close with my recommendations. So the first one, I said, make it attractive to the operators. Potential operators, big companies that would come and they will have to scout. So they need to compare with the other prospects that they have in the regions, or the other opportunities. So I think within the data aspect, we probably should invest in 3D acquisition of the seismic. You acquire more data in the offshore, you interpret or you process this data, you couple it with the 2D, and then you do basically a regional, again, a refresh on the regional basin analysis. So you'll have a better picture and how you would intelligently divide those offshore blocks, therefore market them properly and attract bigger players and attract more premiums as a sign-on bonus to join and take the ownership to operate. We talked about the hydrocarbon law, so ratify it, work on the PSA agreements with good incentives to the operators. And the second one is prepare for the bidding round. So once you acquire the 3D, reprocess with 2D, develop a new basin model, manage the data. Now, there was an effort in 2004, I believe, to gather all the data and inventory of data, whether it's paper, whether it's digital, from everywhere in the world. And there is a comprehensive list now, and this list has to be preserved, maintained, and probably stored in a proper fashion. So when the bidding round comes and when the new seismic comes in, you can link them together and put them as package, as we call it, data packs, for the potential bidders to come in and examine and buy or have the access to the data. They pay for it. And then we said intelligently divide the offshore and then run the promotion campaign for the bidding round. And then last but not least, we said, let's look at how we administer, manage, and validate. So what is the role of the organization in the hydrocarbon entity within the ministry? And what is the objectives? And then start training and recruiting the E&P skilled people so we can be ready on time. The prize? So if you look at the various Mediterranean, I mean, you've got discoveries everywhere between Egypt, Palestine. So you have several discoveries, and we hear discoveries all the time. Even in 2009, there was 2-3 major discoveries been announced. So, so the prize is there waiting. We just have to get more information and make decisions. Now, what is the implication? So the first step, as I discussed, is this is a Lebanon entity, and then you start doing PSC agreement, and then you start forming those operating companies. Now, the first income, if you want to say, or Lebanon would have to invest a little bit of money for the data, maybe on the 3D side and interpreting this 3D side. But then when you start the bidding round, you recover this data from the money from data sales. So when you put those data for bidders to look at, you actually sell them the rights to look at the data. And that's how you recover the first investment that you put in making the blocks more attractive to bidders. The second one is now you start once you award the companies, you start with the exploration. So this is a period maybe 5 to 10 years. There would be drilling activities, there would be more seismic activities, and there will be other activities that actually generate money. And this is an investment done by oil and gas companies. They will come and they will invest because they'll have to spend the money. Part of a production sharing agreement normally is that the exploration phase is normally borne by an oil and gas company. And then when the production, if they hit a discovery, that when they have the production, any money, any proceeds that come from the production is split to recover the cost of the exploration for oil and gas, and the rest would go to the government or the country that owns the reserves. So there will be already millions of investment coming into Lebanon. The second one, then, when you have an oil and gas company operating, then you have a lot of service companies around it. So you'll have anywhere between cementing, logging, drilling, fluids, rigs, vessels, helicopters, testing, you name it, all the technical services around an operator that is actually managing. And this, again, brings in a lot more money to the country in terms of operation. Now, the last one is, now once you're in the production phase, or in development and production, now here you have basically a whole infrastructure around that oil and gas operation that is actually going to bloom in Lebanon. So you'll have more housing to accommodate the workers, you'll have hotels, you have transports, you have banking, human resources, installations, and this, can bring in a lot more infrastructure money for Lebanon. And also, again, if we hit discovery and we start producing, you'll have production dollars for years to come and for our generations. And with this, I thank you.